Welcome to the online classroom for the module RSK4802, otherwise known as Governance, Risk, and Compliance Management. This is one of the 5 modules which is offered as part of the postgrad modules covering risk management through UNISA. In total, there are 5 modules: RSK 4801, RSK 4802, 4803, 4804, and 4805. Of course, RSK 4801 is operational risk management. 4802 is governance, risk, and compliance management. 4803 is 4804 is actually credit risk management. And I think 4803 is, they actually call it risk financing, if I'm not mistaken. I'll just double check the name. And then 4805 is market risk. 4803 is actually called, yes, it is risk financing, as I had suggested. So these are the 5 modules as part of the postgrad risk management modules. If you study a postgrad diploma in risk management, you have to cover all 5 of these modules. But if you're studying for an honors degree in financial management, you can actually pick between one of these 2 modules and INV 4801, like it's an elective module that you can actually pick. So in this first class, I'm just going to be taking you through the first learning unit of the first section in the module. So the module is actually divided into 3 sections. There are actually 3 sections in the module. There's one section on risk management, which will consist of a number of learning units. Then there's a section on compliance management, like the use of a compliance officer, etc. And then the final section is on corporate governance, right? So we're going to cover each of these sections. And as we cover each of these sections, we're going to go into detail with regards to what each of these sections actually covers, all in the context of corporate governance. Remember, the key thing with this module is that it's looking at corporate governance, the framework by which companies actually operate, the guidelines and frameworks by which a company actually operates to meet the needs of all of its stakeholders, not just the shareholders, how risk management can actually be implemented in a strong corporate governance framework, and issues to do with compliance, internal compliance matters and also external compliance matters. So it's quite an interesting field in risk management. And as the introduction says, hopefully by the time that you're through with this, it will have deepened your understanding as to the context of governance, risk, and compliance management in the case of a business, even in the case of organizations, NGOs, corporate businesses, financial and non-financial institutions. In all of these areas, there are governance frameworks which make sure people are doing the right thing in the way they are meant to be doing it to try to meet the needs of all of the relevant stakeholders. Compliance with regards to legislation in the economy they operate, or even internal compliance. So by the end of this module, you should be able to understand the role of risk management in the organization, the compliance management process within the organization as required by supervisory bodies and legislation, and also the corporate governance processes within the organization required by specific supervisory bodies. So corporate governance issues have a lot of legislative issues behind them. There are a lot of laws which actually say that you are supposed to adhere to certain corporate governance matters, especially if you're a public listed company. Compliance management issues, especially with the advent of laws like FICA, financial intelligence, like there are laws that have really recently come into play, like for example, FICA, which is essentially the Financial Intelligence Center Act, and all of those things. So we're going to cover all of those issues. But in this first chapter, so we're going to go through all of that in detail, but in this first lesson, I'm just going to be taking you through the first learning unit of the risk management chapter. There are 4 prescribed books for this module. You can get hard copies or soft copies. There's the Compliance Institute of South Africa 2008 Generally Accepted Compliance Practice. There's the Compliance Institute of South Africa 2009 Handbook for Members. So this is all to do with compliance. There's Valsamakis, Vivian, and Detroit Risk Management, Managing Enterprise Risks. Then there's Corporate Governance Handbook, Principles and Practice by Hendricks J.W. and Hendricks L. Published in 2012. Then there's also a recommended book, which is the King 4 Report on Corporate Governance. This one is recommended. It's not so much it's prescribed. So you'll notice that as we go through this module, we are going to be covering all of these concepts, and will be referred to the prescribed textbook. So we're just going to start by looking at the first learning unit, just going through the study guide, the information that is presented to us. Then we'll refer to a chapter in one of the prescribed textbooks, and we'll discuss that. So the first chapter we're going to look at, the first learning unit we're going to look at under section 1, risk management, is the principles of management applied to the management of risk. So there are a number of learning outcomes through this rather short introductory chapter. At the end of the first learning unit, you're supposed to explain the importance of understanding the business environment, explain how the business environment affects the decision-making of organizations, describe the functional approach to managing risk, identify the main risks, compliance, and governance issues emanating from a given scenario situation in the business environment, describe the main principle of management as they relate to risk management, and demonstrate an understanding of the risk management model. So what will happen in this module is that as we go through the module, you will be directed to specific parts of one of the different textbooks you need to refer to. So the first thing you need to appreciate, first of all, is understanding the importance of the business environment. I think with regards to the business environment, the key thing to remember is that in any business environment, we've got a number of stakeholders, right? Some of the stakeholders are found inside the business, and other stakeholders are found outside the business. For example, inside the business, we've got stakeholders such as the shareholders of the company, the lenders to the company. Okay, lenders are actually outside. We've got shareholders to the company. We've got employees of the company. We've got management. Management is also part of the internal stakeholders. So all of those are stakeholders who actually operate within the company, including the employees. Then outside, we also have a number of stakeholders outside. These include the government, competitors, suppliers are also outside the organization. Lenders are also outside the organization. We have a number of different stakeholders outside, right? And all of these stakeholders are part of a business environment that is constantly dynamic and constantly changing. And due to technology and the speed at which information moves, the business environment has also been changing. Traditionally, there was a shareholder, there was a focus on shareholders only. The goal of the business was just to maximize value to the benefit of the internal shareholders. But with time, things have actually changed. Business objectives are now not centered on focusing on shareholders only. business objectives are now focused on considering the entire environment and all of the stakeholders that are actually part of the business. So that's the key thing with corporate governance. Corporate governance in the old days and risk management in the old days, it just focused on the shareholders and trying to maximize value for the shareholders. But now we've got stakeholder theory, which says that when we look at governance issues, risk management issues, and compliance issues, we shouldn't just look at the internal part of the business in the context of shareholders only, but we need to understand that we've got an environment with many different stakeholders, and failing to consider the appropriate stakeholders that a business is exposed to can actually result in a negative perception of the business. It can actually result in a loss of value, a loss of business confidence, and so forth, which can ultimately affect the shareholders we were trying to just consider under shareholder theory. So it's important to understand all of these environmental pressures that have caused businesses to shift from focusing on shareholders only, but rather to focus on the entire organization and all the stakeholders that whose behavior and whose decisions can actually affect the day-to-day operations of the business, right? What you also need to be familiar with is not only that, we also need to be familiar with the issues to do with the macroeconomic environment, right? There are also other macroeconomic environment besides stakeholders, which can also affect the business. These include macroeconomic factors such as interest rates, exchange rates, inflation, and other economic indicators. But you'll notice that these economic variables, such as interest rates and exchange rates and inflation and other economic indicators, these interest rates, these variables actually change. They actually change usually based on the behavior. These variables usually change based on the behavior of certain stakeholders. For example, issues like interest rates. This is usually a decision which is based on an important stakeholder, in particular in South Africa, the South African Reserve Bank. They set the base rates, which affects all other interest rates. Exchange rates can be affected by a number of factors, including government policy. Exchange rates can also be affected by interest rates. Exchange rates can also be affected by inflation, where inflation can be affected by demand pull inflation or cost push inflation. Demand pull being inflation driven by consumers, which are all stakeholders. Cost push being inflation driven by maybe suppliers. So all of these are inflationary factors that can be impacted by stakeholders. The government can also impact inflation by having an expansionary fiscal or monetary policy. Fiscal and expansionary fiscal policy. The monetary policy would be expansionary through the South African Reserve Bank and a lot of other economic indicators. So even the macroeconomic factors that operate in an environment, they are also affected by decisions which are actually made by the organization and other stakeholders that might be affecting the organization. So you need to understand how those all interact and how it's important to consider the entire environment holistically, considering all the stakeholders, the behavior they can have, and how that can affect the company. And to make sure that you understand the link between all those stakeholders, how they affect each other, and how that can actually affect the concept of affecting the company through the external environment and the value that the company can get through whatever products or services it offers. Okay, having gone through that introduction, so what I'll do with each learning unit, I'll just start with the module overview. just the overview of the unit that's described, and then I'll go to the notes with regards to the things that you need to be familiar with in terms of the particular prescribed textbook you need to use. Remember, we said there are a number of prescribed textbooks that you need to use. So I will start each learning unit by just taking you through an overview of the unit. And then after that, I will focus on key areas in the prescribed textbook. So the final thing is that you need to know the principles of management as they are applied to risk management, in terms of how in risk management we also have planning, which is the foundation of management. Then we have organizing, which is the second function of management, which involves getting prepared. We have directing, which is the third function of management. And lastly, we have controlling. So all of these, we are now going to look at study chapter 1 in the prescribed textbook, focusing on each of these key areas. So what I'll do in each learning unit, I'll prepare notes that summarize the key aspects from the prescribed textbook you need to be familiar with. And then if you just want to read up more around the areas that I've created notes on, you can also go through the prescribed textbook. In this case, the prescribed textbook I'm actually referring to is actually the Valsamakis. That's the one. When we just say prescribed textbook and we don't go into detail, we're referring to this book, right? To the Valsamakis book, right? Okay, right. So let's now go to our learning unit. So remember, the key thing with risk management, the idea behind risk management is that we are essentially managing risk. Just like human resources management is managing people, financial management is managing money, operations management is managing the operations of the business, IT management is managing the information technology systems of the business. Risk management is essentially managing risk. So it's an important function with regards to management, right? So when we talk about risk, you might be familiar with the distinction that we have. We actually have two types of risk when we are looking at the risk that a business is exposed to. We have what we call systematic risk, which is known as market risk or market related risk. And we have unsystematic risk, which is also known as specific risk or firm specific risk. The key thing to understand with risk management is that in any business, risk management is systematic. It's a systematic discipline, which means that it needs to be carried out in many different parts of the business, in many different parts of the business system, and it always needs to be considered. And then we are always looking, when we're looking at a business, in fact, any risk, we always categorize risk into two parts, which is systematic risk or unsystematic risk. Right? When we talk about systematic risk, we're talking about risk that affects an entire financial system, right? It's risk that affects an entire financial system. Risks that affect entire financial system cannot be diversified away. You can't really protect yourself from those types of risks. They're a bit difficult to totally eliminate. They're a bit difficult to totally eliminate, and they essentially refer to risks that affect every single company in the entire market. For example, every single company in South Africa in South Africa will be affected by a change in interest rates in South Africa. For some, it might be a positive effect, for others, negative. For example, when interest rates go up, it sometimes benefits banks, but borrowers would not benefit from that. Inflation affects every single business in an economy. So do economic cycles when there's a recession or a contraction in the economy. These are risks that affect every single company in the entire market, and you can't really diversify away from these risks. In other words, if you're a company operating in South Africa, whether you open branches in all the provinces, you try to diversify by province, you try to diversify in many different ways, you will still be affected in some way by interest rates and inflation and economic cycles because they affect the entire financial system, right? You can manage systematic risk. It's difficult to diversify away, yes, but you can manage it. We're not saying that it's a risk that you then just totally ignore. It can be managed. And we talk about how to manage a systematic risk in RSK 4805, which is the market risk module. Market risk is another name for systematic risk. That's where we talk about how to manage risks from interest rates, foreign exchange changes, and so forth and so forth. And all of these other market risks. We talk about how to manage them in RSK 4805, right? The second type of risk is unsystematic or specific risk. This is risk that affects a particular company or a particular industry or a particular asset. It doesn't affect the entire market. For example, if there's a slowdown in the banking industry, it might just affect banks. It might not affect other businesses. So that's a specific risk. Or let's say a company has branches in Gauteng, in all the provinces. If there are floods in KZN, for example, and a company had a shop there, it will just affect that branch. That would be an example of a specific risk in one particular province, but it won't affect their risks in other provinces. Other specific risks, even at a bank, or even at any company, if you have many different branches, and then at work at one branch maybe commits fraud or they fail to enter certain information correctly on a client and it results in some litigation. That's just affecting one branch. It's not affecting other parts of the business. So that's also a specific risk. It's just risk that's focusing one area of a business or just affecting one company or just one industry or a slowdown in the tourism industry might not affect other industries. So when we look at operational risk, for example, RSK 4801, and even what we're going to talk about in this learning unit with regards to an introduction to risk governance and so forth, we will be mainly focusing on unsystematic or specific risks. This learning unit is going to focus mainly on how organizations manage their unsystematic or specific risks. Because when we're talking about risk governance, we're talking about risk governance in the context of a particular company. When we're talking about compliance, those are, if a company fails to be compliant and it has risk governance issues, those are all firm-specific risks. It doesn't arise as a result of market conditions. Rather, it arises as a result of failures by a particular company. So that's what we are going to be focused on mainly in this module and also starting with this learning unit. Okay, so the second thing you need to be familiar for is why bother with risk management as a company? Why can't we just focus on making profits and just focusing on increasing revenue and profit? Why should companies actually bother with regards to risk management in the context of an organization? Why should a company really aim to manage their unsystematic and specific risks with regards to their firm and their company? Why is this important, right? Why is this actually important, right? So if you actually look at the textbook, we're told about Peter Drucker, right? And Peter Drucker actually noted and said that if you focus on risk management, right, um, it's a very important aspect of a business, right? We know that entrepreneurship drives economic growth within an economy. If we have a lot of entrepreneurs, it drives a lot of economic growth. But Peter Drucker also said that not only does entrepreneurship drive economic growth, but risk management also has a lot of benefits with regards to the overall economic growth of the country. If you look at a lot of scandals that have occurred in the past with the VBA scandal, where there were many bad governance issues, and so forth. All of those issues, in a way, inherently affects economic growth, because in countries where you have companies operating robust risk management systems, people are confident in the financial markets and the way they operate. They are confident that companies are adhering to risk management standards they need to adhere to. People are more prepared to engage with companies. Even overseas companies are prepared to invest, to put their money, because there are good compliance and governance structures in place, which also affects economic growth. We also have Peter Bernstein, who also said that the key to the success of a business is the mastery of risk, understanding the risks you are exposed to as a business, managing them properly is very important in the case and the context of a firm. And this really does help in terms of how the firm operates, its position within the economy, and so forth. So there have been a number of examples of human-made disasters. Some have resulted in deaths of individuals, and a lot of these risks arose due to poor risk management within organizations or within systems or within countries. For example, the thalidomide drug that caused genetic damage in babies. This occurred between 1951 and 61, where patients would be given specific drugs, and then it ended up causing genetic damage to babies, which was a big issue that occurred sometime back between 1959 and 1961. So this drug was essentially sold as a morning sickness drug to ladies who were pregnant in the 1950s. And what ended up happening is that they took this drug, and then it's actually ended up causing genetic damage to babies when they were born, some without limbs. It was a major issue that occurred, and it occurred due to poor risk management. Remember, now a lot of drugs need to be tested significantly before they are approved. There need to be a lot of clinical trials. Then in 1984, we also have what we call the Bhopal chemical leak that killed a number of people. This again was a risk management failure. This was a significant risk management failure that actually happened in 1984. And it actually happened in India. There was a leak that occurred, and it was one of the worst industrial disasters that happened. It was in a pesticide plant, which was owned by a certain American company. There was a certain gas that leaked called methyl isocyanate, and then a lot of people inhaled that, leading to over 1,500 people dying. But the number of deaths over the years has actually risen. So some of the causes of the failure were safety failures, cost cutting, loss of preparedness, and all of these issues occurred as a result of poor risk management. So we're just seeing why risk management is important. We also have the Piper Alpha offshore rig explosion that ended up killing at least 165 men. Again, this was another example of a risk management failure that happened on this rig, which resulted in significant deaths. And actually, what happened in this particular case is that in 1988, in the North Sea, approximately a number of maybe up to 120 miles or so from Scotland, there was a disaster in the rig. You know, those oil rigs that actually are used to mine for oil. There were a number of explosions. and only a few workers who were working on that rig survived. They started with a gas leak, which caused an initial explosion, and then there was a fire. The design and safety systems were actually not adequate. Like there was maintenance failures, communication breakdowns, design flaws, safety, a lack of safety culture. So this is all tied to operational risk management and risk governance. You know, operational risk management, which is RSK4801. So this is another example why risk management is important. And lastly, of course, we have the September 11 terrorist attacks. I'm sure we know all about these. There were a lot of warning signs which were not heeded. Uh, a lot of risk management failures. People didn't know, like security checks when people were going into airports were not as stringent before September 11. So those were risks which were not managed properly. And then we also have corporate losses. Sometimes poor risk management can result in corporate losses from fraud and mismanagement, such as from Barings Bank and Enron. These are um, international companies. But we also have some issues that have happened in South Africa, such as the VBS scandal that was due to poor risk management. Um, that was a really major scandal where a lot of people lost a lot of money and the money will never be recovered. But banks have become more stringent with regards to managing some of these risks. So so those were some issues. There are a number of examples in South Africa, not just the VBS scandal, but we also had other scandals, some tied to institutions which are associated with the government, like corruption accusations at companies like ESCOM. And of course, also the Steinhoff scandal. So some of these scandals you will see, you'll cover them in assignments and in case studies. Okay. So there've been a lot of key trends in risk management over time, from when risk management was first considered to be a significant factor in the case of a business up until now. There's been a lot of increasing sophistication of risk. Like there are new risks that are arising, like cyber risk due to automation and robotics. New chemicals are being created all the time. Electric vehicles, advancements in technology from AI and other issues, and all of this creates new potential risks. Like a lot of companies are now considering cyber risk, risks from robotics. All of these are increasing new risks which are not present like 30 years ago. We've also got an increasing concentration of risk because technologies are becoming complicated and businesses are multinational, they have larger operations, and sometimes it's actually hard to know where a company actually has significant risks unless you actually analyze the company and the technologies that are the company is exposed to in detail. There's also been an increasing awareness of risk. In companies, almost all companies are really considering risk as a key issue. You can see by all the governance issues we have, operational risk management frameworks, things like that. And the public is generally more aware of risk and safety issues, especially operations, health issues, safety issues in the company. Companies need to have health and safety policies that are clearly understood by the people in the company because you can face a lot of litigation if you don't take that into account. Um, and also, there's also been a decline of insurance as a risk financing technique. Traditionally, most risk management relied on insurance. Companies just relied on insurance, but companies have started to use more creative ways of managing risk. For example, we have what we call captives. We will discuss them, especially if you do other RSK modules. Captives are essentially companies that are created by insurance companies that are created by a company, like will, an individual company, let's say a company will own its own insurance company, and then they'll use this insurance company to insure the company and its subsidiaries. So that's a captive. There's also risk retention, where a company just decides not to use insurance, but rather retain risk and manage it in other different ways, like the captives I was telling you about. They can also go to alternative risk transfer, where they go into the commercial market and issue bonds or other assets which help to reduce risk. If you do the other RSK modules like RSK4803, which is risk financing, you'll cover this in detail. So we've talked about reasons to manage risks, right? We've talked about how managing risk is important to corporate objectives, survival, growth, and maximizing shareholder wealth. Not managing risk can lead to scandals, which will lead to poor reputation, litigation costs, business interruptions, many different aspects which can negatively affect the business, right? So those are the general reasons why we say risk must be managed. But when we're looking at specific decision criteria, we also need to consider the cost benefit analysis. Managing risk shouldn't become too expensive such that it's not worth it. For example, if there's a risk, if a certain risk occurs, if there's a risk that you will lose 200,000 as a company from that risk, you can't then spend 500,000 to try to manage that risk. So that's a poor cost benefit scenario. Ideally, you should want maybe to have a risk of 200,000, then maybe you only spend 20,000 to try to manage that risk. Maybe that could be a premium you pay to transfer the risk to an insurance company or other risk management systems you have in the business. Also, risk aversion. Some companies are more risk averse than others. Some companies might say, no, if it comes to the risk that our IT system goes down and we don't operate for 2 days, we're fine with that. That company would have low risk aversion. Whereas another company might have high risk aversion, where they say even an interruption of 2 hours, we don't want any risk. We want to avoid any risk as much as possible. So that company would try to have a lot more risk mitigation techniques. So that's risk aversion. Some people are more risk averse than others, meaning some people are less prepared to take on risk compared to others. Others might just say, we're okay with the risk. If it happens, it happens. We are fine. But we will try to save money by not doing any risk mitigation techniques if it happens. Whereas other companies might say, we want to avoid any risk as much as possible, and we are prepared to spend some money to try to mitigate that risk. Also, we have policy-based decisions. Some companies have certain organizational policies that drive risk management, even we're not motivated by risk concerns. They just have a culture whereby there are a lot of policies that drive risk management, whereas other companies might not have that many policies with regards to risk management. And then finally, authoritative reasons. The government in which the company operates might now, or the regulators might just come up with legislation, certain codes of practice, certain things they expect to happen with regards to risk management, and that might actually force companies to have to adhere to certain risk issues, even if they don't want to. So these are just some specific decisions as to when a company will decide to manage risk or not manage risk. Okay. So lastly, you need to be familiar with the functional approach to risk management, the definition of risk management, the risk management model, and the historical development of risk management, right? So what's the functional approach to risk management? We know that in terms of any management, when we're looking at any types of management, if you've done management courses before, the functional approach to management involves planning, organizing, directing, and controlling. Right? Planning, organizing, directing, which is leading and controlling. And the same applies when we actually look at risk management. Just like all the other functions within a business, whereby you plan to determine the organization's missions, goals, and strategies. So in risk management, you would determine these in the context of risk management. Organize, whereby you allocate resources, defining duties, and establishing procedures. in the context of risk management. Then you lead and direct human resources and motivate them to achieve goals. And then you control, ensuring that the organization stays on course to attaining goals. So that same approach that we use when it comes to general business management and with regards to each specific management function, we also use that same approach when it comes to risk management. So all of those functional approaches you learned, if you've ever studied risk management, they are not only centered on all of those functional approaches you learned when you studied business management, they are not only focused on business management, they can also be extended to risk management. Planning, organization, leading, and controlling can also apply to risk management, and it can apply at different management levels within the business. Usually, you have the strategic level top management identifying missions, goals, and strategic plans, which is usually the planning and part of the organizing, but usually planning with regards to risk management. And then you actually end up getting the operations management, which is done by middle and lower management, whereby they actually now help with defining duties, establishing procedures, directing human resources and motivating them to achieve goals and so forth. So you tend to get strategic level top management actually being focused more on the planning function of the organization, even with regards to risks. And then with a slight overlap on organizing, but the most parts of organizing, leading, and controlling fall onto the middle management and the lower management. Right. So the study guide goes on to talk about the definition of risk management. In the past, risk management tended to be left to individual managers within the organization, where each management function, human resources, etc., financial management would manage risk on their own. But we now have what we call an enterprise-wide approach, whereby risk is considered at a top strategic level with regards to the whole company, and it's not left to individual management functions to manage risk alone. So we have what we call an enterprise-wide approach when it comes to risk management, whereby we we consider risk on a firm level, not on a functional level, like on a firm level, not on a functional level. So an enterprise-wide risk management approach is comprehensive. It considers the entire business strategy of the business, all the people and its processes. It's inclusive. It involves all levels of the organization, not just leaving individual business functions and business units to manage risks for themselves with no strategic decision. And also, it's proactive. It anticipates risks in advance. In the past, risk management tended to be more reactive, that after something has happened, then we start to come up with risk mitigation techniques and so forth. Formally, risk management can also be defined as follows. Risk management is a managerial function aimed at protecting the organization and its people, assets, and profits against the physical consequences of risk. It involves planning, coordinating, and directing. Remember, these are three of in fact, planning, coordinating, directing, and risk control. These are the four management functions, remember. And the risk financing activities, which is RSK4803 of the activity, setting aside money to help to manage these risks. So that's the formal definition of risk management. So you also need to be familiar with the risk management model. The risk management model is essentially the 5 steps involved in the risk management cycle. You need to determine your objectives, which align risk management goals with the organization's mission, formalized by a risk management policy. After that, you need to identify risks. Some risk management cycles start with risk identification, whereby you identify the source of the risk, hazards, activities that increase the likelihood of loss and exposures. The operational risk management module talks a lot about how to identify risks. It also talks about risk evaluation and assessment, which is quantifying risk impacts by evaluating loss, frequency, severity, and analyzing the organization's financial strength. If you did RSK 4801, you would see a lot of this. We also then have risk control, which involves implementing physical management programs with the following possible responses. It's actually more than 3 possible responses with the following. I think that's better. With the following possible responses. When it comes to risk control, you can choose to avoid the risk, right? Which is not carrying out specific risky activity. Just try to avoid being exposed to the risk at all. You can accept the risk to say, okay, we have the risk and we won't do anything to actually mitigate the risk. Just leave it as it is. We can use this in let's say a company wants to introduce an IT system. One company might just avoid the risk and say introducing IT systems might be risky with people's data, the system crashing. Let's just continue with the way we're doing things. Of course, that would be a disadvantage in terms of evolving and modernizing the business if you actually avoid the risk. But then you might just want to avoid it because you're also very risk averse. You might just decide to accept the risk to say, okay, we're going to introduce the IT system, but we won't have any IT risk management policy. We'll just introduce the system and leave it as it is. You can then have mitigation where you introduce the system, but you decide to come up with certain risk aspects to mitigate the impact of the risk. Maybe take out in terms of mitigation, maybe have backup IT systems, come up with backup IT systems in case the risk happens, and then you can try to mitigate it in some way. There's also risk financing. Risk financing is when you now try to set aside money to try to manage the negative impact of the risk. This can be done through self-funding, where you set aside some money to meet any issues that happen should the risk occur. You can try to diversify, whereby one of your branches will have a different IT system, another one a different one, and different one, such that if one crashes, the others are okay. You can even take out insurance, whereby if there are IT issues, an insurance company will pay you. Then the last part with regards to the risk management model is program monitoring and administration. This means you continually review and revise decisions when conditions change. So the prescribed textbook has this important risk management model, like a tree diagram, where we start with risk management at the top. Then we have risk control, whereby you look at the loss frequency. You can control risk by looking at loss frequency reduction and looking at risk loss severity reduction through a number of issues, like trying to control engineering losses, reducing the likelihood of a fire or the impact of such, having proper security, also considering risks. But these risks that are at the bottom here, they tend to be more market-related risks. So in this case, we're just talking about risk management in general, not just looking on firm-specific risks. Risk financing involves retention, trying to keep some of the risk within the business by setting aside money to meet any risk issues that arise. Whereas external financing, you can have a pre-loss external financing, financing which happens before the loss, and then you can have post-loss external financing, which are usually financing facilities should the loss arise, right? So I keep saying risk financing is RSK 4803. Whereas risk control is mainly covered under operational risk management, RSK 4801. Lastly, there's been a lot of historical development of risk management. This is just for interest's sake. I don't think it's something you would be asked in the exam. Early developments of risk management occurred in ancient times, as far back as 3000 BC, Babylon times, where people were actually coming up with with some creative risk management approaches um, in the ancient days. Uh, so risk management actually came about some time back. It just didn't start like now. Like traditionally, individuals have always been in the habit of trying to manage risk in some way. So bottomry essentially involved like the owner of a ship getting a loan and then actually using the the ship as a means of collateral. So if you owned a ship and you were going to make a journey, you could actually get a loan. Then you could use the ship as collateral. If the ship didn't make the journey and it sank, the lender would lose the collateral, which is the ship, and you wouldn't have to pay them back. However, if the ship made the journey, you would actually use the money that you receive from the journey to pay off the loan. So it was actually a risk management technique which was used by individuals who owned ships. Then there was insurance, where Greeks and Phoenicians actually extended bottomry with special provisions, whereby now you would actually receive a loan, but there were now special provisions with regards to the payback of the loan and the ship. So what the Greek and the Phoenicians did, they actually went a bit further with regards to bottomry. First of all, they extended coverage such that the protection went beyond just the vessel and the cargo. They also had formalized contracts and they had pre-established values on the vessel and the cargo. Uh, they would be so now they were saying for a particular I think this way it was now the other way around. It would be the party who owns the ship who's actually going on a journey who would now pay the insurer a premium, and then the insurer would now offer some protection should something happen. So to the ship. Then we also had the management function recognition by FIO in 1916, where FIO identified security activities as one of the six basic management functions. So that was also really important. In the United States, we just summarized from 1931 to 1965 how modern risk management is developed through the publication of the first textbook on risk management, a professional institution with regards to risk management and so forth. In the UK, we are also just told how risk management has actually evolved to the first degree program in risk management in 1982. And then in South Africa, we are also told about the evolution of risk management and the forming of a lot of organizations. So, as you can see, in summary, risk management is a very important part of the management function. It involves planning, organizing, leading, and controlling, just like all management functions does. It's evolved from merely preventing and funding losses to rather an enterprise-wide risk management approach where we consider the whole firm and we manage risk on a firm level basis rather than just leaving individual managers to manage risk by itself. So thank you very much for listening to the first class in the module. In the next class, we're going to move on to learning unit 3. Sorry, I mean learning unit 2, which is the concept of risk. Again, we will go to the prescribed textbook. I'll start off by covering an overview of the unit. We'll go to the prescribed textbook, and then we'll just look at some important concepts. If you have time, just look at the reflection, just to give you a deeper understanding of some of the concepts we were doing. Risk is quite an interesting area, and hopefully by the end of the course, you will understand its importance and what it's all about. So thank you very much for listening. Any questions or queries with regards to anything covered in this class, anything you want to raise or just talk about or you want to ask, please feel free to let me know. I'll always try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thank you very much for listening. and all the best with your studies.